All right, we are live. Or wait, are we live now? We are live now. Awesome. We are live. I am Father James, and this is the Barely Protestant YouTube channel, YouTube video thing, funness. Anyway, I was asked to do I actually said I would, and then I forgot about it, but I was asked also to do a video celebrating, a live stream celebrating the 1,000 subscribers, which we have 1,000 subscribers now. Yay! Which is awesome. I think we're at like 1,030, I think, or something like that right now. So I am going to be taking live questions from anyone who would like to ask any questions. And we already have one at the very beginning. This one came out before I think the show even started. Hello, Father James. What do you think is the most effective way to get evangelicals into accepting a more liturgical and sacramental form of Christianity, such as Anglicanism? So, it's a bit of a complicated thing, and that's a major aim of a lot of what I do when I give video explanations and things like that, is to sort of help people understand the issues that are found within modern American evangelicalism. And not to say that modern American evangelicals are necessarily heretics or things like that. It's just pointing out that there are fundamental issues with the way, the approach that is being done there. And I think one of the major issues would be the seeker-sensitive form of worship. The idea is that, going back to the 60s, 70s or so, there was this idea that, well, our aim in worship on Sunday should be to get people to come. So when our focus is upon how can we get people to come here, we'll get more people to come in. And that has worked. That works without question. When your focus is to do so, that will happen if you do it well, I guess you could say. But is that the focus of church? Is that what church is about? Do you bring, until the 70s or so, the idea of you bring someone to church to get them saved or to become a Christian was not primarily the way to do it. The point of Sunday worship was actually for people who already are Christians. That is the focus, and not for a sort of self-gratifying thing. The point of worship is to worship God. It is the gathered community of believers worshiping God together. And we are making a habit of this worship of God together within the liturgical life. And one of the people I would highly recommend for this is James K. A. Smith. He's got a lot of really good books on this. You Are What You Love is a really, really good one. So yeah, definitely. He's got a bunch of videos online too. So anything on just put in YouTube, the search bar, put something like James K. A. Smith. That's two middle names, K A, two middle initials, Smith. Liturgy or liturgical worship or something like that. So yeah, I would definitely direct people to James K. A. Smith's work, primarily because he sort of identifies as an evangelical. He's, I think, Dutch Reformed or Presbyterian or something. I think Dutch Reformed, but he's evangelical, but he is also very pro liturgy. And he notes that what happens, everyone has a liturgy. Everybody has a liturgy. The question is, what is your liturgy doing to form you? Because part of the worship, the point of worship, is to form you into who you should be. And the liturgy of a modern American evangelical church, well, what is it geared towards? It's geared towards music that entertains you. Geared towards the idea of a sort of, quote, practical or pragmatic sermon, where it's sort of like 10 steps to help your marriage get better, which obviously that's not a bad thing to talk about, but the idea of that being the sermon is a problem. That is something that should be reserved for, say, a Wednesday class or something like that. That's not something that we're gathering for worship for. Our point of worship is to worship God, not to sort of do the sort of 10 steps to become a better you or any other thing like that. And it's not, the point of the music of worship is not to entertain you. The point of the music of worship is to uplift you and bring you into the presence of God. That is why word and sacrament are so important within the life of the church on Sundays, because it's the point of uniting one to Christ. And how are we united to Christ? Through word and sacrament. All right. Hopefully I've said enough there. But again, James K. Smith has a lot of really good stuff on that. Could you talk a little bit about Eastern Protestantism? What's the relationship between Anglicanism and the Martoma Syrian church? I love the Martomas. The Martomas are basically sort of, they're I don't want to speak too much onto what they are exactly, because I've not done any sort of like serious research into them. But my understanding of them is that they were sort of like an Eastern group that decided to become join into communion with Anglicans. And Martoma is Saint Thomas. So the Eastern churches, especially like in India, Indonesia, and those sorts of areas, they claim heritage, apostolic heritage from St. Thomas. So this group decides to join up with Anglicans, and we're in full communion with the Martomas, and they are sort of a reformed Eastern Orthodoxy, I guess you could say. They're actually, I've not been to I think I have been to like one or two Martoma churches, but there is one in Tampa, or near Tampa, that is near my aunt's house, like just a few blocks down the road. And I've not been to it, but I would love to go to it one day. It's never happened, unfortunately. And this is my St. Patrick's mug. I'm hoping to get some for St. Paul's, our church here. All right. Congrats. Thank you very much, Alan. Check out Alan Rule. He is a Roman Catholic historian. I wouldn't say apologist necessarily, although he does some apologetics, I guess you could say. Mostly he makes fun of James White, which, no, he does much more than that. No. He does a lot of, he's one of the most intelligent men I've come across, especially when it comes to history. He is like his own Alexandrian library is like in his head. I don't know how he did that, but it's been done. All right. How do you respond when a Roman Catholic says that his church is only founded by Jesus himself, while yours was founded by? So this goes to a major issue with sort of the mindset that happens, and we've allowed this mindset as Protestants to go in. This is why I am very insistent. Part of why I am very insistent upon our Catholicity as Anglicans and various forms of Lutherans and other various Protestant sects. And the reason is that I don't want us to be claiming that we're founded by Henry VIII, or that we are founded by, Martin Luther or anything like that. We can talk about reformers from those groups. And the way I sort of turn the tables on them is I say, well, prior to Vatican I, the Roman Catholics did not demand papal infallibility as a dogma to be believed. So does that mean that Roman Catholicism, because that's a belief now that is dogma, that's de fide, does that mean that Roman Catholicism started at Vatican I in the 1870s, or was it 1870 or something like that? Yeah, 1870 or so. No, obviously they wouldn't say that. So we can talk about Reformation, and there have been various reformations within the Roman Communion. You've got the Gregorian reforms of the 11th century. You've got the Council of Trent is a reformation of its own, and like Trent is good in many ways, but also bad in other ways. I would obviously disagree with Trent on various parts, but it does actually repeal or not repeal, but get rid of some of the errors and heresies that, whether you want to say formally or informally, were being held by many Roman clergymen. So, like, that is a reform itself. Vatican II is a reform itself. Every church goes through reforms. So our position as Anglicans, as Lutherans, and other groups is that we are reforming. It's a reform of the Church Catholic. So we are Catholic. And to say that, well, because we had these reforms, therefore we're a different church. Then by that token, Vatican I makes Rome a different church. It doesn't make sense, that argument. So I would point to those sorts of things. We find, and one of the strongest parts of that for Anglicanism, at least, and maybe various Lutheran groups as well, is that as Anglicans we do claim apostolic succession. Now we go back and forth on all that sort of stuff, and that's a debate in and of itself. But at least on the physical aspect, we obviously clearly do. I would say, and I would say on the theological aspect as well. All right, continuing on. So given that your church didn't exist until the 16th century, it doesn't have any authority. Okay, so that's a just continuing part of that. Okay. Yeah, so that I think I already answered that part sufficiently. If I did not, please go ahead and I don't know if I should put that one. Internet enjoyer. As an early viewer, congrats. Oh, well, thank you very much. I'll put that part of it there. So yeah, I wasn't exactly sure how this would go about, and I don't want to have a lot of dead air, but I didn't think through this part very well. So I'll be waiting for more questions as it's going through. And yeah, so whoops, let me go ahead and fix that right there. Yeah, so in the meantime, while I'm waiting for more questions, I will say that I'm really happy that the channel is growing. I hope that it's nothing but a help for other people to understand Anglicanism, classically Protestant sort of understandings of our faith. And I do want to reiterate this because I've said it before, but people misunderstand my title, barely Protestant. I never not that I never wanted it, but I never really sort of planned on this being like a channel that does sort of apologetics for Protestantism or Anglicanism. If I ever like set out to do that, I would have not picked the name barely Protestant, I think. But it is what it is, and that's fine. And the reason is that I think people think that term, I'm sort of implying that I don't want to be Protestant and Protestantism is bad and that sort of stuff. And to be fair, there was a time when I was kind of like that. But the name actually barely Protestant comes from when I was looking into Eastern Orthodoxy. And I've told this story before, but just in case if you haven't heard it before, Eastern Orthodoxy, which during that time when I was looking into Eastern Orthodoxy, I would constantly insist upon my Protestantism, that I was still Protestant. And people would say like, well, you use icons, you believe in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, and you have all these other views and all that sort of stuff, and those aren't Protestant views. And so I'd be like, no, I'm Protestant. They'd say, no, you're barely Protestant, and we'd have a good laugh. So like those sorts of things, like that's how the name stuck. So I made an email address that's barely Protestant and all that sort of stuff. So yeah. Let's see. What's the reason that classical Protestant groups, Anglicans, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Methodists, I wouldn't put the last two as classically Protestant, but yes, fall so deep for liberal and progressive theology? How can we eradicate that liberalism from our denominations? So a good book on this would actually be Bad Religion by Ross Douthat. And he's Roman Catholic, but he doesn't pretend that this is only a Protestant problem or something like that. In short, what he talks about is the fact that the mainline denominations, these are Anglican, Lutheran, Presbyterian, and Methodist, are all mainline denominations. They were heavily involved, and I would say in many ways this is good, heavily involved in the civil rights movement, and that brought a lot of sort of prestige and good honor, or whatever you want to say, to the Protestant sects. And so they sort of were sort of going off of that high of, well, we want to find these rights for these marginalized people. And then there's the narrative of like LGBT being, quote, marginalized, women being, quote, marginalized, and all that sort of stuff. So it sort of follows from there that they're like, oh, well, we need to free and liberate these people as well. So it sort of regresses into that. And you have to combine that also, though, with, and this is documented, that there was a sort of Marxist, major Marxist influence and infiltration within the seminaries, specifically from the Soviets. So like that's something that actually did happen. And that when you control the seminaries, you control the education of the people who are going to be the leaders for the next generation. And so that influence harshly affects the the leadership, and so the next generations, they don't care so much about conformity to the scriptures, conformity to the historic Catholic faith, all that sort of stuff. So that, in a nutshell, is what happens. And again, that's not that Rome doesn't have that or the East don't have that. They do. The problem is that we are just more well seen with it. And I mean, I would say that Rome, you can see it today. And some elements of the East, you can see it today. I think the East is a bit of a different context and more protected, because not until recently were they sort of in the Western sphere, like in a prominent way, I should say. So it's had a bit more defense, but it has its own liberalisms, honestly. I mean, basically universalism is an acceptable position for the East, and I would say that's a quote liberal theology. So let's see, where's this one? Whoops, there. Congrats, Father James. Thank you very much. You got LJ. I don't know who LJ is, but what's the reason that oh, I already did that one. Let's see. What's the reason that classical... Whoa. Okay, I guess it was accidentally done like 3 times or something. All right. Okay. Oh, Tiffany, congratulations. Thank you. And you got recently married, so congratulations to you as well. All right. Any Protestant apologetics books or works that you would recommend? I think we need those sorts of things, because the ecumenical movement of the 20th century has this sort of, obviously ecumenical. So it's, Roman Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, Protestants sort of singing Kumbaya together. And there are good elements of that, but then there are also bad elements. One of the bad elements I think has happened is that, to be nice, there's sort of this cultural shift within Protestantism where we're like, okay, we're going to refer to Rome because they're sort of, quote, more ancient and all that, as like sort of that's the Catholic Church. And we're just Protestants, and that narrative is allowed to be run where it's this idea of like, well, they're quote more ancient. Like, no, I mean, like, yeah, the See of Rome is more ancient than the See of Canterbury, for instance. Yes, you could talk about that, but like that sort of deference to them. And what I'm saying, pointing out, is that like the sort of like giving the bones to Rome, and then Rome sometimes does, but sometimes doesn't sort of reciprocate that, where it's like, well, you can be Catholic, or we can consider you Catholic too. Like, the position of Rome to this day is still that if you're not submitted to the Bishop of Rome, you're not part of the true church, which means you're going to hell. And yes, caveats and all, like everyone has caveats, but like, of course, those are always taken for granted. But like in a general sense, like you're going to hell if you don't submit to the Pope. I'm like, that's not a nice position. We should point out that is not a nice position. It's not, there's nothing gentlemanly about ignoring that very true position of Rome. Not that the position is true, but like the fact that that is a position of Rome is true. So all that being said, I don't know of any Protestant apologetic books that I would necessarily recommend. I would have almost, I'm acquaintances with Dr. Jerry Walls. He has a book called Catholic but Not Roman, or maybe it's Roman but not Catholic, one or the other. And I can't recommend it because he tries to cast too wide of a net to sort of allow for evangelicalism, which is sort of like a rejection of infant baptism, and many evangelicals at least, rejection of like any sort of efficacy of the sacraments and all that sort of stuff. And I'm just like, that is not Catholic. You cannot call that Catholic. You cannot. I'm not interested in defending evangelicalism in sort of the modern American context. So like, I can't recommend that one, although like I would say a lot of that book is good, but a lot of it's I would say is not good. It's a book that I want to write. I'm actually writing one that is a defense of Anglicanism, and I've gotten about maybe a chapter or so done, not much more than that. So yeah, there's that. Next one, Alan Rule. Have you read anything by the 8th century English monk Stephen of Ripon? Binging his stuff now, and I like it. I have never heard of this Stephen. So I've not, as far as I know, read any of it. But tell me what I should read. Good grief, a bot. Block user. I think that's what I'll do. There you go. Um, Communism really protected the East from social liberalism, funnily enough. I guess you could say that. Yeah, because at least the attacks from communism in like the East were more explicit, I guess you could say. Although I'm not some sort of like Marxist historian of Marxism's history and stuff. But I can see that line where it's like, well, the attacks are obviously more blatant. I mean, that's why you have like Russian Orthodoxy. Although, I mean, Russian Orthodoxy has been a bit influenced by the Soviets. So yeah. Do Anglicans have the ministry of exorcism? I have done an exorcism before, and we have liturgical liturgies for exorcism. It's not in the main prayer book or anything like that, so it's not in the 1928 Book of Common Prayer or any other prayer book that I'm aware of, other than like sort of exorcisms for baptism. Various prayer books have that, but I think obviously we're talking more about like a straight up exorcism. And there are prayer book supplements to prayer books that do have things like that. So yeah, you're welcome. The Catholic Religion by Vernon Staley, one of the best Anglican apologetics books. I guess you could call that one. Yeah, that works as a good apologetics book. That's one I generally recommend, although it's incredibly outdated. I mean, this is from like the early 1900s, maybe late 1800s. So this is before the issue of liberalism, which is the main sort of defense that we have to give ourselves, because that is a genuine issue that we have as Anglicans is that we have that reputation of being, quote, liberal, or not quote, but being liberal. And there is an infestation of liberalism within the Anglican communion, and we have to address that. That is an actual thing. And one of the things I love about being Anglican is that I can admit that. You know, I can admit that we are not infallible. So let's see. Let's look at this one. Protestant sex is normally I think you mean derogatory term that RC in my country like to use against any Protestant. Can I ask you why you feel comfortable using it in an Anglican context? So I've never understood the word sect as derogatory. It's genuinely true. Like it is a sect. Like I don't know. I don't mean it in a sort of like schismatic way, I guess. So I can see how it can be understood as a schismatic sort of thing. But yeah, I wouldn't. That's not how I'm using it. So, Life of Saint Wilfrid is what you need to read from Stephen of Ripon. All right, Ripon. Have you ever read Against Romish Anglicanism from Charles Spurgeon? Any thoughts about it? I am not generally impressed with Charles Spurgeon, so I have not read Charles Spurgeon on this book of his, and I'm assuming that he was probably talking about Tractarianism, maybe ritualism. I don't know. Was he alive during the time of the ritualist movement? I'm not sure, but yeah, just not a fan of his. I find, I've said this before, I don't like with Spurgeon, I kind of find him sort of as like the fortune cookie theologian. Like I see people post things that he says, and it's always like, I'm like, did this come from Joel Osteen or did this come from someone else? And not even that it's like a wealth and health and prosperity thing. It's just that it's so cheesy and like not very deep. And he sort of exemplifies one of the major issues I have with like sort of the neo-reformed, the tulip type people, is that like they've got this obsession with like how bad they are, and they're like, yeah, I'm totally depraved. Like if it weren't for the grace of God, I'd kill 20 people. Oh, I'm more totally depraved. If it weren't for the grace of God, I'd kill 50 people. And it's just like, shut up. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be too mean. Maybe I am a little bit, but like, I'm not impressed. I really couldn't care less. And like, oh well, yeah, well look at what St. Paul does. I'm like, St. Paul does that one time. Many of you guys do it like every day. Okay, like give it one time and that's it. Okay, do it one time and no more, please. Thank you. So yeah, I'm not impressed with the sort of like the pseudo macho. I'm more depraved than you. Like it is bragging. It's like absolute bragging. Like because like, and the way it's bragging is that they're claiming like, well, I'm depraved. I'm more depraved. Like they're showing off that they're more knowledgeable about how depraved they are. All right. And they're like bragging about the fact that like they know more about how depraved they are than the other person. And just so like that whole thing is just really stupid. I'm like, yeah. Liberalism has infected everything. It's horrible. That is true. Hopefully the Church of England doesn't give into homosexual marriage. I think that they've already crossed a line in the ordination of women, or the quote ordination of women, just like homosexual quote marriage. So I think that that is already a few steps too far. They're already a few steps too far already. So yeah, but it is what it is. I will say, and I think it's important because the reason I'll talk about Rome a lot is that I get a lot of Roman Catholics who go on this channel, comments, or on my Facebook page or wherever else, and they'll just sort of like mock Anglicanism. And so my defense tends to be like, okay, well, like look at your own communion, physician, heal thyself. So I want to point out that I would say, for instance, that the Immaculate Conception as dogma is a liberal theology. The assumption of the Blessed Virgin as dogma is a liberal theology, because what is liberalism? It is an innovation upon the faith. And I would say the papacy's quote development or evolution or whatever you want to call it, from a primus inter pares, first among equals, to the papal supremacy, one man ecumenical council. And that is not hyperbole. I know some Roman Catholics would argue against that. That is literally what Vatican I allows for, a one-man ecumenical council. Fight me on it. I'll debate you on that. Like that is one of the most liberal theological positions possible, because it is such an innovation upon the faith. It is so crazily an innovation upon the faith. So yeah, I want to point out that that is liberalism too. Another question: how do you understand apostolic succession in Anglican communion compared to Orthodoxy or RCC? So I would say that it is not necessarily fundamentally it's not different. We would say that there's a line of bishops that we can physically trace back to the 12 apostles. And for instance, my my bishop, I think Bishop Sutton goes back to St. Andrew. I think I have to look again, but I know my former bishop, Archbishop Foley Beach, I know, or not know, I'm like 90% sure he goes back to St. Andrew. I'm sorry, I did not memorize my bishop's lines of succession. And plus there's a lot of like intermingling within them. So it's just sort of like, well, yeah, you can kind of trace them pretty much to every single one. But there are ones like that. One of the reasons that people go to St. Andrew for a lot of Anglicans is, well, Scotland, St. Andrew and all this sort of stuff. St. John would be another one for Anglicans that we would look to as sort of the fountainhead, I guess you could say. But like again, because you require at least three canonically, no, actually I think within Anglicanism 4 bishops to lay hands upon a man to be consecrated bishop. That's 4 different lines that could maybe be from one apostle, ultimately going back to one apostle, but they could be from different ones. So you could always go through those lines in different ways. So on the sort of the basic fundamental level of apostolic succession, we would agree on those points. Sorry. Spurgeon Boo. Amen, Alan. Don't you think that Anglo-Catholicism could in some cases lead to a serious deviation from historic Anglicanism and to crypto-papism? Yes, there are forms of Anglo-Catholicism that I would reject utterly. And I think I've done a video on this before. I've made the distinction within Anglo-Catholicism of you've got the sort of the ritualist types who are just sort of like high church, like they like the smells and bells. So high church liturgically, ritualist type kind of ones. Then so they might be liberal. They could be like crazy liberal. So there's like an Anglo-Catholicism that's liberal. Then you've got sort of like the Anglo-Catholics who are sort of like the more like the Caroline Divines, the Tractarians minus Newman. They could be comfortable with like the term Reformed Catholic or something like that. Then you have what I call the Anglo-Papists or the Anglo-Papalists or the Anglo-Romanists, crypto-papism, all that sort of stuff. Those are the ones who are just sort of like, and I have a lot of respect in many ways for Dom Gregory Dix, but he would be one as one example. So yeah, there are different ones. The first one I would put, let me think. What's his name? Oh, he was before Shorey. He was the presiding bishop before Shorey in the Episcopal Church. That guy, look him up. He is a sort of liberal, quote, Anglo-Catholic, but just like he likes smells and bells, and he's very liberal. That's the idea. Someone who's a like Anglo-Papalist. I already gave like Dom Gregory Dix. Generally, they all just become Roman anyway. But I mean, like Gavin Ashenden, who unfriended me recently because I was complaining about his constant hating on Anglicanism. Although, I mean, yeah, whatever. Anyway, so, but someone like a Gavin Ashenden, who even before he became Roman, he was just sort of like constantly like you can always tell when like an Anglo-Catholic is either about to become Roman or like will eventually become Roman. They will not say like Roman Catholic, or they will not say like Romanism or Papism. It'll always be like the Catholic Church. I'm like, dude, like you as an Anglo-Catholic should know we are Catholic, and the idea of like privileging them as quote they're the real Catholic Church, that's a one-way ticket to going to Rome anyway. So, and then the last one would be like the type that I would be like a Reformed Catholic or sort of Tractarian or Caroline Divine, E.B. Pusey, maybe E.L. Maskell. I have a lot of respect for him. Others of that sort of ilk. So there's that. Let's see what else. Where are we at? Oh, there we are. Don't talk about our mama. I don't remember what that was, but unfortunately, England barely has any good alternatives to the Church of England. There are some sort of independent groups of Anglicanism, but yeah, it's a bit of a difficult thing in England. You guys are in my prayers. Maybe we should send some missionaries over there, some more missionaries. Did Anglicans have a hardcore scholastic orthodoxy era like Lutherans and Reformed guys? I'm trying to think. Hardcore scholastic, maybe. Yeah. I can't. I don't know. I guess if you're thinking about like theology proper, yeah, I can't think of any sort of hardcore scholastic orthodoxy era. Part of me is I'm not sure exactly what you mean by that. I guess like if you mean by scholastic as in like Thomism and all that, well, not just Thomism, but like having a sort of rigorous theological conversation on a scholarly level. 1800s. The strength of Anglicanism has been much more when it comes to the faith, liturgy, and history. We have had amazing historians. Our scholastic tradition hasn't been amazing, I would say. Maybe someone like a Milbank, John Milbank, or is it Milbank, right? I think is his name, or is it Millhouse? All right, now let me check now. John Milbank. Yeah, I mean he's currently he's one of the ones I would come for. Yeah, so someone like a Milbank might be someone you might want to look at. That's awesome. You've answered all my questions. Awesome, or answered them well. Thank you. Yes, awesome, good. Corey Byram, what are your thoughts on the Protestant doctrine of two kingdoms, form of the conscience internal and form of the externals, and its importance in maintaining Anglicanism as Protestant? So I am the two kingdoms tends to be more of a Lutheran thing. I don't think it is nearly. Sorry, there are kids playing outside, and it's a bit distracting. I wasn't expecting them to be right out there and very, very loud. Hopefully you can't hear it, but it's really, really loud for me. Thankfully, this new microphone shouldn't be picking up that sort of stuff. Anyway, the two kingdoms thing, I think we can track at least with Augustine on it, especially in today's context. So one of the things that we have to understand is that Anglicanism is thought of as like, well, there's the Queen and she's the head of the church and all that. That's not quite true. She's the head of the Church of England. She's not the head of the Anglican Communion. The head of the Anglican Communion would be the Archbishop of Canterbury. So we don't have this sort of inherent rejection of any understanding of separation of church and state. That could be good or it could be bad. I have my own opinions about that. I do think that it is not wise or possible to have an American type of governance and culture and all that sort of stuff and a Christian state church attached to it. I think, honestly, I'm convinced that American culture has been the number one driving force of liberalism, and yes, partially influenced by Marxism. But I think Marxism, so part of it comes from Hollywood, I would say, and that's another avenue that we get Marxism sort of spewing itself into the culture of the United States. So we could talk about the 1800s before, when before Hollywood and all that sort of stuff. Hollywood and the sort of the liberal academia, although there was liberal academia before, but not quite a Marxist thing. Anyway, so the issue is that if you're talking about two kingdoms in the let me see if you actually form of the conscious internal and form of the externals. I don't know exactly what that one means. Are you talking about let me see if you actually elaborate on that one. Let me see. All right, I've got some books for you then. It's found, I'm not going to pull it up just so I don't forget where I'm at. But in Calvin, Vermigli, etc., and the influence of these men upon England is notably evident in Hooker. All right. Yeah, I mean, go ahead and recommend them to me. Yeah, I don't want to pretend that I know more than what I'm talking about here. I do understand Luther's, or I do know that Luther talks about the two kingdoms thing, and there are two different forms of the two kingdoms. Actually, maybe just one. But when I hear two kingdoms, I tend to think amillennialism. But I guess that could also work with a post-millennial. I'm post-millennial, a post-millennial worldview, where the two kingdoms are side by side. So it goes back to Augustine, I would probably venture to say. But yeah, anyway, let's see what else. Where is that comment? Wow, I got a lot here. Oh wait, oh no. The priest of my parish is an Anglo-papalist, essentially submits to papal authority. Well, that's unfortunate. I'm sorry about that. Do Anglicans still do confession reconciliation? Yes, we do. Yes, we do. What are your thoughts on annihilationism? I am an annihilationist. I've actually done a debate on that, and it is allowable within Anglicanism for me to be an annihilationist. I was referring to the Protestant Orthodoxy era, the 16th to 18th century. I don't remember exactly what that was about. Sorry. People on the Lutheran side, Martin Chemnitz, Johann Gerhard. I don't remember what that one was about either. Let's see. Theologically, doctrinally, explain key differences in Anglican and Methodist. I've heard how Methodists are just evangelical Anglicans, but I think that's not a faithful statement to either group. It's a bit of a broad category for both. So there are high church Methodists, but I would say that a sort of good rule of thumb of Methodism is that it's sort of an evangelical Anglicanism. So I would say that if I were to walk into your average Methodist church and your average self-branded evangelical Anglican church, they would be not very different. In fact, I would say, like, let's say there's a high church Anglican or sort of confessionally, historically Anglican church right here. Then there's an evangelical one. This is not like greater or lesser. This is just sort of high church and then going down the line. Let's make sure. Okay. Yeah, there. And then there's the evangelical Anglican here. And then I would say like the sort of maybe high church type Methodist would probably be around here, and then the sort of Evangelical Methodist would be around here. So there's that. I mean, there are other differences. There's not a sort of universally used prayer book tradition for Methodists. And I'm trying to remember. I don't think they have a confessional statement either. Whereas we do have confessional. We call them the formularies. We've got the prayer book. We've got the 39 articles. We've got the books of homilies. Those three become our confessional standards. So there are a few differences, but it's important to understand that John Wesley himself was an Anglican. He died as a priest within the Church of England. So search Luther, Reformed, Orthodox, Classicism to understand what I mean. All right. I may or may not be able to do that live right now. Let's see. Oh, that's one you did before. Senator Joseph McCarthy was right. Actually, it is amazing. There is a project called the Venoma Project. I think it's called Venona or something like that. And they actually, I think every single person that McCarthy formally accused of being a communist, like a communist spy, like a Marxist spy for Soviets, was a communist spy for the Soviets. There might have been one or two people like that. Either we weren't sure, or he kind of maybe sort of half, but every single person he sort of formally, officially accused, yes, was a spy. So yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Do you Anglicans have confessional binding documents? I just gave those. Yes. So yeah. If it isn't the case, what wouldn't that make Anglicanism too loose, where you can believe whatever you want as long as you have bishops and nice customs? Yeah, that's one of the issues. That's one of the accusations that's made. That's why I'm very strong on the idea that we have to hold to our confessional standards. I think that they are more loose than what some people might argue. So it sort of depends. I would say, for instance, that there is a bit of a leeway on the question of the Eucharist, that you can find Calvin and Vermigli's position, but you can also find Luther's position there. So I think both are sort of allowable. Let's see what else we have. What do you believe about the validity of the sacraments in churches without Episcopal apostolic succession? What I say is I do not know. Well, let me keep that up there. What I say is I do not know, and I do not want to claim that the sacraments are not there. I want to say that I have no assurance that they are there, and I think that's an important distinction to make, because I don't want to deny that the grace of Christ is being given to us in, say, like a Baptist church. But I also know that the standard historically has been apostolic succession, validly ordained priest under a validly or consecrated bishop, etc. Why did you not become Eastern Orthodox? For a variety of reasons. The first one is that I could not agree with the idea that my baptized family members, who are, I would argue, are part of the church, they would disagree, the idea that they could not receive communion at the church that I would be at. And even worse, because at that point I knew I was called to the priesthood, the idea that I would have to celebrate the divine liturgy or Holy Communion or the Mass, and would have to refuse Christ to my own family, was just unconscionable as a Christian for me. And that's one of the reasons actually I didn't become Lutheran either. And not because of obviously if there are heresies and all that sort of, we can talk about that sort of stuff, but for me, there's this issue. I will have to stand before God one day, and God is not going to, I don't think that God is going to condemn me, or I'm not going to be in trouble with God because I allowed someone to receive communion who came up with various private sins or whatever, or private heresies. That might happen in some certain cases. However, in other words, what I'm saying is I don't think I'll get nearly in so much trouble for allowing someone to receive communion who maybe shouldn't receive communion. I know I will be in trouble as a priest before the eyes of God for refusing someone communion who should be receiving communion. And as an Anglican, I don't have those structures that sort of block that. Whereas within the Eastern Orthodox, I would have to refuse communion to people who genuinely should be receiving Christ and who are qualified to receive Christ according to historic Catholicity. Are they baptized? Do they confess Christ in the Eucharist? Have they confessed their sins? They should receive communion. Anglicanism allows for that, whereas other groups like the Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholics don't. There are other reasons too. I'm much more Western in my theology, other things like that. But yeah. Methodists use the Book of Common Worship, yes, 25 articles in Charles Wesley's hymnals as far as formularies. The United Methodist Church, I don't think is confessional, though, in the United States here. So that's one example. But yeah. Methodists don't typically do systematic theology. Actually, they do. Cottrell, I think, is a Methodist. He has a systematic theology, Jack Cottrell. So yeah. McCarthy was actually pretty liberal for his time. He had gay friends. Yeah, that's true. He actually had gay friends, and he was pretty liberal. Yeah. If Anglicanism is supposed to be a vita media between Wittenberg and Geneva, why do most Anglicans today seem to think that they are a vita media between Rome and Protestantism? Just sort of like accidents of history. So like the question of the via media between Rome and Protestantism versus the via media between Geneva and Wittenberg, I think a lot of that tends to be just semantics. The via media thing, I think, is just sometimes just not helpful. If we're going to talk about a quote via media, a better way to phrase it would be, I am, as an Anglican, a Reformed Catholic. So part of that incorporates the idea of the combining of Geneva and Wittenberg. Another part of that shows an adherence to a fidelity to the historic liturgy. I would say that the Book of Common Prayer is faithful to the historic Catholic liturgy. But we're also Protestant. So, I mean, yeah. So, yeah, hopefully that helps out. Let's see what else. Let's see. Okay, let me look at this one. I have the same concerns with Lutheranism. We were all baptized into one body. Yeah, that was one. I love Lutheranism, but that's one of the issues I have with Lutheranism. AME is a confessional Methodist group. Actually, most of the Black Methodist denominations in the U.S. are, but I agree with you on UMC. Yes, I didn't realize that the AME is confessional. That's cool. I think I've been to one African Methodist Episcopal church. Are you familiar with the work of? I love Hans Boersma. He's great. I recommend Scripture's Real Presence to just about everybody I read. Heavenly Participation is another good one. To everybody I know who reads and all that. I just recommended Scripture's Real Presence and Heavenly Participation, or at least the first one. I don't think I recommended Heavenly Participation as well. To a friend of mine about 2 or 3 days ago. Boersma has spoken at our clergy conference before, or more of a clericus, and he is an Anglican. He's, I think, a deacon right now within the ACNA. So yeah, I'm okay with that actually because it falls under one church history. Fountain pens or regular pens? Regular pens for me because I am left-handed. So when if anyone who's left-handed knows that when you write, you smudge all over the place. So I have these sort of like gel type pens, and I have to be careful with those. But those write very well. But I'd want to get into fountain pens, except I'm left-handed, and so it just would smudge everything, and my handwriting already looks bad enough. So it's African Methodist Episcopal Church, the AME. I've been to, like I said, I think I've been to like one or two. But yeah, the one I went to, just one actually. The one I went to was, I think, kind of charismatic. So I don't know how big that is of a thing within the AME, but yeah. My condolences. Well, thank you. I mean, I would love to have like use fountain pens, but just yeah. But I also love being left-handed. I'd rather be left-handed than have fountain pens. The AME are very strict. They come directly from the MEC, whereas the UMC has a number of additions and subtractions over the years. Interesting. Do you see the Apocrypha as inspired? I lean heavily towards that, yes. I would have some maybe slight caveats about it. I think that we can talk about different levels of inspiration. I don't think, for instance, that there's maybe, let me think. I would say that like the Deuterocanon is inspired still, but not exactly for the same exact reasons and for the same benefits of the church. It's a sort of supplementary addition to the canon. So it's deuterocanonical, hence deuterocanon. But actually, the books of homilies talk about the Apocrypha / Deuterocanon being inspired by the Holy Spirit, calls it Scripture, calls it God breathed, etc. Are you familiar with the issue of the Spanish Black Legend? I am not at all familiar with that. So yeah, sorry, I can't help out with that. Any other questions? All right. Let me go ahead. Wasn't there something someone asked me about before? Let me see. Let's see. Where was it? Oh, there's a new comment. The Spanish Black Legend is BS. I don't know what that is. I don't know. Is that like an Anglican Apostolic Succession thing, New World thing? What is that? Do I not want to know? Because I might not want to know. We'll see. All right. Oh, here's one. Oh, hey, it's Craig Truglia. Oh, wait, whoops. I skipped Anglican. I skipped Anglican. I'll do that one in a second. Why do Anglicans best represent the apostolic faith? Because we recognize the errors that have happened within the Roman system, and our standard is the scriptures through the eyes of the patristics, and we allow for that. And we make fewer dogmatic claims than Rome does. So we would definitely and so like just we make fewer dogmatic claims, and the ones that we are like we left Rome over are just undeniably false. So when it comes to the Eastern Orthodox, one of the issues I talked about before, I don't know if you were here for that part, but one of the issues I have with the East is that there is an exclusivity of communion, and I don't think that that is historically based. I don't think that the sort of excommunications that happen in the early church are the same sort of idea that you would see within sort of refusal of communion today by various groups. It's almost like the Eastern Orthodox, the Roman Catholics, and other groups like that have a standard of excommunication when actually it should be the opposite. Like excommunication should be only under very grave issues, not like, well, you aren't exactly the same in us in every single way, so therefore we're just going to assume you're excommunicated, kind of thing. Like we're going to assume that you shouldn't have the Eucharist, especially when like they recognized baptism, which is always an interesting thing. Hey Craig, whoops. Hey Craig. Hey Alan. Oh wait, whoops. I need to go back to that one too. Is the African Methodist Episcopal Church segregational? Only Africans can attend? I don't think so. I doubt that. Yeah. Let's see. My name is too confusing. It keeps coming up in an orange box anytime someone types Anglican. Nice. What about Marian devotion? There are limited forms of it, which I think are okay. I have my brother is Roman Catholic, and I will I will have, not always, but sometimes I'll pray the rosary with him. I'm a bit hesitant about it because there are ways I think that are proper to pray to the saints, and I've done a video on this. You can go back and check it. But I think that the rosary does not do it in a proper way, so I'm hesitant to use it more recently. But there can be good Catholic Marian devotion, like truly Catholic. Let's see. Alan Rule, that's a huge issue in my homeland. It hates and attacks directly the Anglo-Saxon culture and Protestantism. I've seen people that are very fanatic about it. I guess the Spanish Black Legend, I guess. Does 1 Corinthians 11:14 and the liturgy in St. Hippolytus' apostolic succession indicate Anglicans don't follow the earliest church practice either? I'm not sure exactly what you'd be referring to with that. I think we're consistent with 1 Corinthians 11. And I don't know what part in St. Hippolytus that we would deny. So, yeah. Alan Rule, have read Maria Elvira Roca's That. It's the most important book about this. Okay, I don't know. Hopefully it's not some sort of like neo-Nazi thing or neo-Marxist or whatever. Everyone hates the Anglo-Saxon because they ain't us. Okay. Do you know about the Ethiopian Tawahedo Orthodox? I've heard about them, and I used to know a bit more about them than I remember right now. But when I was looking into Eastern Orthodoxy, they were groups that I would talk about. I do know that the Coptics in Egypt and Anglicans have a very, very strong relationship with each other. And I think maybe not formally, but practically, there's intercommunion amongst us with the Coptics. I know that I know a bishop who's Anglican who has good relationships with the Oriental Orthodox, the Coptics in Egypt, and there's stuff like that goes on routinely, and no one kind of cares. What's really interesting is that this whole question of like intercommunion and stuff in places like the Middle East, it's not nearly as big of a problem. In places like Africa, it's not nearly as big of a problem. I know a bishop who this was at a Roman ordination. Again, this is an Anglican. This bishop was at an ordination for his friend who's Roman Catholic, not Anglican, and he was, while he was in the pew or chair or whatever, watching for the ordination. When the ordination was about to happen, one of the bishops grabbed him and pulled him up to do the ordination with him. That's in Africa, which is tends to be thought of as like a sort of strong bulwark of orthodoxy within the Roman communion. So yeah, like stuff like that happens routinely. That's not like a one-time thing. That's, again, like I know a lot of clergymen in Africa and not as many in the Middle East, but a few in the Middle East as well. Those sorts of things are pretty common, relatively common. They hate us because they ain't us. Well, I don't know who the they is. No, the AME is definitely not segregational. In fact, it formed because of being segregated against. Yes. All right. How do you see the atonement? Primarily as Christus Victor, but also penal substitution as well. I take like a lot of views, but those are the two primary ones. I think Christus Victor is far more important than penal substitution. I think if you have a penal substitution only view of the atonement, that you have major problems with your atonement theology. I haven't read it. Let's see. Here's one. I'm speaking of communion being a meal where the bishop teaches in between. I'm speaking of a liturgical practice which is more informal and somber. Oh, I don't think that it requires to be formal. I don't think it's required to be so. I mean, I would not be opposed to that, but it can happen either way, honestly. Like I'm pretty high church, but I've had informal Eucharists with people. It's very intimate. I think it's great. And obviously validly ordained priests and all that. Like I wasn't just like a bunch of us like in our backyard singing Kumbaya or whatever, but we had it was like around a table with a priest. a dining room table, someone, and like the liturgy was done and everything, but like we still had teaching, we still had hugs and all that sort of stuff, and it was very intimate. It was lovely. I love the Anglo-Saxons. They have some of the best saints. Edward the Confessor is one of the great Catholic medieval monarch saints, along with Louis IX and Fernando Castile. All right, let's see what else. Okay, English for the most part. Most Anglicans have great relationship with the Oriental. Yes, that's true. Most Anglicans have great relationships with the Oriental Orthodox. That is true. I honestly, I'm not even sure, like, other than sort of like a formal uh, schism, like it's basically not there. Like I don't remember if I said it or not. I think I started saying it, but like the whole idea of like schism and like, oh, you're Anglican, but you can't go to this Roman church and receive communion because you're Anglican, not Roman. That's largely a Western thing. Like in the midst of persecution, they kind of couldn't care less. Many of them. So like if you go to Nigeria, I mean there are some like people who are anti-Roman. I'm not going to lie, but intercommunion is much more feasible there because they actually care about the more important things, like not getting killed by heretics, not heretics, but by not apostates, but by pagans, which Muslims are. Let's see. Ransom view represent. Yes, that's another one. Thank you very much. Do you know if there is an Anglican liturgical rite or formula for exorcism? There are actually quite a few. It's just not in the sort of there's not like a liturgy itself separated for exorcism in the Book of Common Prayer. There are supplemental ones, a Book of Occasional Services and things like that that have exorcism liturgies. What is Christus Victor? It is that Christ conquered death, and through his resurrection, we are saved. So in baptism, we are united to Christ into his death so that we may be raised, as Romans 6 says as well. The idea is that the death of Christ, along with his resurrection, is showing sort of like is that he is conquering death and sin through his resurrection. So that's why Christus Victor, Christ is the victor. So. What is your view on the Church of the East? Are you talking about the Assyrian Church of the East? I know very little about the Assyrian Church of the East to speak sort of like expertly on it. I know a bit, but the Assyrian Church of the East, I would say, is not actually Nestorian, although that accusation happens. I mean, they look at Nestorius as a saint, but I don't think. I think that Nestorius gets a bit of a bad rap. I think his hangup is that the same hangup that a Baptist would have with the question of like the Mother of God. I don't think he was literally. Maybe he was, and I might be wrong. But I don't think that the Assyrian Church of the East necessarily is a proper Nestorian church in the sense of like holding to the heresy of Nestorianism. Same idea with like the Oriental Orthodox. I don't think that they're actually monophysites. They're miaphysites. And so, for instance, and Maya means mono. Yes, I know all that. But like the point being that they would say that Jesus Christ is fully God and fully man. They would just say that that's one nature. The nature is fully God, fully man, and they would accuse us of being Nestorian because we would claim that Christ has two natures. So it's largely sort of like semantics. I think that is kind of what's happening with the Assyrian Church of the East, although the Assyrian Church of the East is so small. Yeah. Are Episcopalians growing? Now, if you're talking about like the Episcopal Church, like the liberal group, they are not growing except for in the more conservative diocese. And I'm putting quotes there because the quote more conservative diocese still allow for women's quote ordination and things like that. So they're still pretty liberal, although they're forced to allow for that, which is at least more sympathetic or whatever. But when it comes to the ACNA and the REC and all that sort of stuff, like the more traditional Anglicans, yeah, we tend to be growing pretty well, I would say. Let's see. And here's another one. Anyway, guys, I think you should dive into this movement and deal with their arguments because it is becoming a huge. Oh, okay. Yeah, I really don't know that thing. I'm sorry. I'm going to block this other bot. There you go. Yeah, I really don't know what that is. Do you believe that Mary is the mother of the church? Sorry for another Mariology question. She is maybe a bigger deal than most Reformation churches told her to be. Yeah, so I'm fine with utilizing that sort of language. Um, I think that we can use that sort of language for. I think she's the mother of God. I think that works best. Um, so, uh, yeah, I'm not opposed to that terminology. I think Mother of God works better though. So, um, whoops, where is it? Have you read about the new Bishop of Springfield? I think I've heard about something like that, but I don't know. Um, Is heaven a purely immaterial spiritual place? If so, how Enoch, Elijah, and Jesus were taken there bodily? I would reject the idea that heaven is an immaterial place. I don't think spiritual means immaterial, by the way. I think that is a major issue that, especially we in the West, have uh, had this idea that the spiritual means not physical or not material. If that is the case, then 1 Corinthians 15 talks about our resurrected bodies being spiritual. Well, if spiritual is just another word for immaterial, what that means is then the resurrected bodies are immaterial, and that's a denial of the resurrection. And then that's a denial of, because it's connected to the body of Christ there, the resurrection of Christ. What that implies, I would say necessarily concludes, is that Jesus himself did not physically rise from the dead, only spiritually, and meaning non-physically. It's like there are major issues. Is there a movement in the ACNA working against female quote ordination, or do most people in the ACNA that hold that position move to the REC? I'd say it's both. So I think the majority of dioceses in the ACNA do not allow women to be quote ordained to the priesthood, and the REC doesn't allow women's ordination. Period, just flat out across all the dioceses. So some people move to the REC. Most of the people I know who moved to the REC for that exact reason are in what's known as the Diocese of the Churches for the Sake of Others, which is a non-geographical diocese. Its short name is C4SO, and it is a bit of a problematic diocese, because if we're going to talk about sort of liberalism within the ACNA, that's where it kind of stems from. There's a lot of concern about that diocese, a little bit of inside baseball with the ACNA. But yeah, no, the majority, I think, of dioceses do not allow for women's quote ordination within the ACNA, and the RC just doesn't at all. So there's a movement of working against that, where there's a desire to ban it outright, which I'm 100% for banning it outright. And then there are people who are just sort of like, well, I'm just going to be in the RAC because that just makes more sense, where I don't even have to worry about this fight. I worry about the fight in a godly sense, worrying about the fight. But I'm also in the REC, but that was just because where I moved, I would be under the REC. So, what do Anglicans think about charismatic gifts? By the way, you have a charismatic doppelganger on YouTube, Chris Garcia. Look him up. I will look him up. Thank you. So the charismatic gifts, there's a variety of positions. Every major denomination has sort of a charismatic branch to it today. The Romans do, the Methodists do, even Presbyterians do. Maybe Lutherans don't. Maybe not Lutherans, but no, there are charismatic Lutherans. But yeah, Anglicanism has charismatic types. I will say this: I've been to one, maybe a few, but one particular charismatic Anglican church, and it wasn't my cup of tea. However, I will say that it was done biblically insofar as like the commands in 1 Corinthians are concerned. What is it? 1 Corinthians 13, 12, 13, wherever, about like how speaking in tongues and interpretations should be done. So it wasn't like what I witnessed when I went to a oneness Pentecostal church, where just people were literally just running around screaming, babbling, and it was just insane. Like just pure chaos. That was not, that's obviously whatever you want to think about speaking in tongues is clearly not allowed within St. Paul's theology. So, given all that, like, it was done biblically insofar it is biblical or not. So it's not my cup of tea. I do stress that St. Paul does talk about being the least of the gifts. So obviously things like the idea that it's necessary for salvation or that is a sure sign that you're saved, like that, I would say is fundamentally opposed to Scripture. So yeah. What are my thoughts on theosis? I would say, actually, Christosis is the term I've heard that I actually prefer. Theosis, Christosis, union with Christ. I'm for it. I believe that it is explicitly taught in Scripture. So, yeah. Let's see. What is the difference between the REC and the G3 churches? Or I think it's G4. Or is it G4 or G3? Anyway, so just jurisdiction, honestly. It's just, well, I mean, I guess a bit more than that. So the REC is in communion, full communion with the ACNA. We are not just in full communion, we're sort of like a sub-jurisdiction of the ACNA. And the G4, 3, whatever churches are a bunch of jurisdictions that gather together and are in full communion with each other. And some of them are in, I think all of them actually are in full communion with the REC. So, like, yeah. Is the Eucharist a perpetual offering up of the one sacrifice of Christ? The Eucharist is the presentation of the one sacrifice, which is the body and blood of Christ on the cross. It is not its own propitiatory sacrifice. It is not a different mode of the sacrifice. It is our joining to that one sacrifice, our being joined to the one sacrifice of Christ on the cross. So insofar it is offering the body and blood of Christ, it is offering the sacrifice, but it is not offering a propitiatory sacrifice that is separate or unique from the cross. What I understand from James, High Church Memes for Anglo-Catholic Teens, the new Bishop of Springfield may very well be more Orthodox than Bishop Martin's was. Oh, I hope so. My understanding is that there was like a woman who was being a bishop, quote, Bishop of Springfield, but maybe, I don't know. Father James, I have to head out. Thanks for answering my questions and good luck on getting the next 1,000 subs. Thank you. You too, Mr. Rule. Thank you. You too. All right, let's see. If you're flipping and flopping on the floor with glossolalia, that's very likely a demon. I wouldn't necessarily disagree. It could be that just you're allowing, anyway, yeah, it's just, yeah. I'm not the biggest fan of all that. All right, so we've been going for about an hour and 10 minutes, an hour 12 minutes. Let's see. I'll look for any final questions. Hurry up and get them out if you would like me to answer them. I kind of answered this one already, but I'll go over it again. I prefer Anglicanism in part because it does allow for a wider allowance of people to receive communion. I'm still Protestant, very much so. I'm Western in my theology. There are other things, for instance, like annihilationism, that I'm allowed to hold to as an Anglican that I would not be allowed to hold to as an Eastern Orthodox, which is really odd because basically universalism is allowed in Eastern Orthodoxy, but annihilationism isn't. So that's just a little odd to me, which I would say is annihilationism is very patristic. I would say I would strongly be able to defend annihilationism within the patristics. So yeah. What did Peter mean in 1 Peter 3:21 with the phrase, not the putting away of the filth of the flesh, but the answer of a good conscience toward God? Is that it's not the water that actually is saving you. It is the fact of this being the covenant commitment to God through the sacrament itself. So yeah, you're not being saved by like the putting on of water. Like that's not saving you. It is the actual act of the sacrament itself that you are being given the promise of God through the sacrament, which is a misunderstanding that a lot of sort of non-sacramental Christians have, is that they basically think that we believe in magic water. No, it's not. It is like, as the sacrament, it is word and water, water and the spirit, word and water put together. So when I tell you that, like I'm giving you the gospel, and by hearing the gospel, you are enlightened, because that's what Scripture says. The gospel, the preaching of the gospel enlightens one. Uh, what am I saying? Am I saying that like the sound waves coming out of my mouth are magical, that like magically regenerate you or whatever, or magically bring you into faith? No, no. I'm sticking to what Scripture says. It's not the physical thing itself that is sort of like independently sort of magically doing things. It is that physical thing, which sound waves are physical, water is physical, being joined to the power of God. That is sacramental theology in a nutshell. The grace of God being joined to physical creation for salvation. All right. Let's see. What about M005 proposed by the Episcopal Diocese of Northern California? I've heard that there's some sort of weird stuff going on with the Episcopal Church today, but like that's every day. So I don't know. Let's see. Wouldn't that rule out the belief in regeneration tied to baptism? No. Hopefully, my answer helped explain that. I sent you the link about M005 earlier. Did you get to read that? I don't know who this is. I get a lot of. Is this? Oh, this might be Zach. I didn't get to read that. Just to let you guys know. When it comes to Messenger, I try not to be on Messenger that much on Facebook. Part of it is I try to really just do, like, I have so many other responsibilities and I don't want to slack off from them. So one of the worst ways to contact me is through Messenger. So if you have my phone number, and please don't give out my phone number, you can text me. That would be a better way probably to contact me. That just works out better for me. But I think, okay, if it's Zach, yeah, I think I saw that you sent me something. I've just not been able to look at it yet. I'm sorry. And again, I get messages from people every day, like multiple people every day on Messenger, and it's very difficult to keep up with. And then combine that with like sort of 2 different email accounts and the my own texting, text and all that stuff, Twitter. People message me on Instagram. People message me on the Facebook. Although I have that one on automatic, so it automatically just goes to email with those, so that at least declutters things a bit. But like, yeah, I get a lot of messages. I'm not trying to be whatever. It's just it's not easy to follow everything along. So yeah. Do you believe in purgatory? If not, how to avoid imputation of righteousness? I do not reject. Well, I hold to purgation, which is the cleansing of the soul, of sanctification. I guess we could call it sanctification, although that's not technically maybe the best term for it. But anyway, the point being that we are purified after death, and we actually pray for the dead in Anglicanism. Within the 1920 Book of Common Prayer, we pray for the dead explicitly, asking God to have them grow more into Him. Let's see, Facebook gaming. Okay. Let's see. Sola fide, how do you understand that? It is a slogan. It does not mean faith alone to the exclusion of anything else ever existing whatsoever, which is kind of how some people, portray it. I mean, for instance, obviously by grace through faith. Apart from the works of the law, I go back and forth. So I think the Reformed tend to have a better view of justification than Lutherans. I'm sorry, my Lutheran friends. Maybe I just have not read Lutheran theology on justification enough. But I do think that our works are a sort of outpouring of that justification, and that there's the line that, like, it's faith alone, but faith is never alone. And I think that is a good sort of summary of it. With all that understood, I think that my issue, and this gets into a bit more controversial stuff, is that we use the word sanctification as sort of like, well, the sanctification part is like the after you're initially saved. The sanctification part is the growth and all that sort of stuff. Well, it's almost the opposite, I would say, maybe, where sanctification is the setting aside of someone to be holy, to be made holy, and the justification is it's an act of God, and it is, again, I take NT Wright on this, so I do side with NT Wright on this, is that it is a declaration made at the end of time, and that declaration is brought into the present, where, because God, being you know atemporal, who, he's not constrained by time, he is able to like see the future. It's not the future to him, obviously, but anyway, the point being that we are justified, which is there's a final justification, and that final justification is brought to the present, and we are united to Christ. So I would side with partially side with Rome when it comes to the idea of infused righteousness. We are actually united to Christ. We have we talked about union with Christ as an essential part of salvation, but so it's not just a sort of mere imputation. But again, I'm not sure. I'm not sure the reformers would posit some sort of mere imputation either. So there's that. Let's see what else. Okay, I think that's about it. It's been about an hour 20 minutes, and I've got some other work to do. Thank you for answering my question. God bless. All right. Thank you all very much. I hope you all have a good day, night. And thank you so much for everything, for following and all that sort of stuff. If you have not yet subscribed, please subscribe. Also, I have a Patreon, which would be awesome. We're trying to get some better work and better cameras and all that sort of stuff for all this. But God bless you all. Have a good night.